There was a time when the name BioWare was a seal of quality. It was a promise. It meant that for the next 60 hours, you weren't just playing a game, you were living a second life. You were making choices that mattered, surrounded by characters who felt like real, flawed, complicated people. But look at the BioWare of today. Look at the headlines, the modern writing, and the sanitized, corporate-safe worlds they now inhabit. BioWare didn't just lose its way. It was hollowed out. It was dismantled from the inside, piece by piece, until the BioWare Magic became a punchline for mismanagement and ideological capture. Hello everyone, I'm the Paladin, and today we're tracing the timeline of the fall, from the humble beginnings of the Doctors to the catastrophic failure of the Veilguard. This isn't just a story about bad games. It's a story about what happens when a studio stops caring about its players and starts caring about the message. BioWare started in a basement in Canada with 3 doctors, Ray Muzica, Augustine Yip, and Greg Zeshuk. They weren't activists. They weren't consultants. They were RPG nerds. From Baldur's Gate to Star Wars, Knights of the Old Republic, they defined the modern RPG. They understood that diversity in a game should be organic. Think of Juhani in KOTOR or Zevran in Origins. These were characters first, and their identities were part of a rich, often dark, tapestry. But in 2007, the Reaper came knocking. EA acquired BioWare. At first, it seemed like a dream. Unlimited budget, massive reach. But the EA curse is real. It's the slow, bureaucratic rot that prioritizes recurrent consumer spending and broad appeal over creative soul. The focus shifted from what makes a great RPG to how do we make this the next big franchise? The first real crack in the foundation appeared in 2012 with Mass Effect 3. For 5 years, BioWare promised that your choices matter. Then came the ending, red, green, or blue. A literal choose your color finale that ignored every decision you'd made across 3 games. The fan backlash was legendary, but BioWare's response was even more telling. Instead of admitting they dropped the ball, we saw the first signs of the modern defensive posture. Media outlets began labeling disappointed fans as entitled. It was the first time the studio and the journalist class stood together against the actual players. Shortly after, the Doctors, Ray and Greg, left the company. The soul of BioWare walked out the door, and the corporate yes-men moved in. When the founders left, a vacuum was created. For the next decade, the old guard followed them. Drew Karpyshyn, the lead writer of Mass Effect, Casey Hudson, David Guyder. Who replaced them? This is where the story takes a turn into the nuance of modern gaming culture. The industry began a shift toward DEI hiring practices. On paper, it sounds fine. In practice, it meant that writing rooms were no longer filled with the best storytellers, but with people whose primary qualification was their adherence to a specific, progressive worldview. We started seeing characters who weren't written to be real. They were written to be representations. The grit was sanded off. The dark and dark fantasy was replaced by a Marvel-esque, quip-heavy tone where nobody's feelings can ever be hurt, and every conflict is a black and white morality play where the modern side is always right. Then came the actual failures. Mass Effect Andromeda was a technical disaster. The tired faces, the broken animations, and the writing that felt like a CW teen drama. It was the first time a BioWare game felt cheap. It had the first inklings of the progressive message and the beginning of a focus on the infamous and non-existent modern audience. And then came Anthem. This was the death of the BioWare identity. A studio known for choice and consequence was forced into making a live service looter shooter to satisfy EA's greed. It was a soulless, flying simulator that crashed and burned because BioWare Magic, the idea that a game will just come together at the last minute, finally ran out of juice. Which brings us to the present. Dragon Age: The Veilguard. This game is the final evolution of the modern BioWare. The dark, blood-soaked world of Origins is gone. In its place is a neon-colored, sanitized experience that feels like it was designed by a committee of HR representatives. The controversy isn't just about wokeness for the sake of it. It's about authenticity. When you have a scene where characters stop the world-ending plot to discuss pronouns or identity in a way that feels like a 2024 Twitter thread, the immersion is shattered. The game was designed around consultancy rather than creativity. We see reports of sensitivity readers and consultants like Sweet Baby Inc. or internal DI councils influencing the narrative. The result? A game that is safe, inclusive, and a huge piece of garbage. It's a dark fantasy where you can't even be a bad guy because the writers are afraid of making the player or themselves uncomfortable. So, where does this leave us? BioWare is currently betting the farm on Mass Effect 5. They've teased the return of Liara. They're trying to use nostalgia to pull us back in. But can we trust them? The people who made Mass Effect great are gone. The people currently running the show seem more interested in social engineering than space operas. If Mass Effect 5 follows the Veilguard blueprint, if it replaces the humanity first versus the council grid with sanitized, safe space dialogue and message-driven characters, then BioWare is truly dead. The industry is terrified that we won't buy the lie anymore. They want us to believe that this shift is evolution, but we know what it is. It's decline. BioWare didn't fail because it became diverse. It failed because it became dishonest. It stopped trying to reflect the human condition and started trying to correct it. It traded its funds for accolades from journalists who don't even play the games. Modern BioWare didn't become easier. It became afraid of its own shadow. And in a world where Baldur's Gate 3 exists, a game that actually has the balls to be dark, weird, and truly free, there's no longer a place for a studio that treats its players like children. But what do you think? Is there any hope for Mass Effect 5? Or is the BioWare we loved buried in a shallow grave? Let me know in the comments. This is the Paladin signing off. Please like and subscribe for more videos, and I will see you next time.